Excellent. So I'm going to run quickly through the definition and the mechanics and on to the lessons learned in the past year and a half that I've been a software engineer and Scrum Master in SLS. So Scrum is a lightweight process. It doesn't go into much detail. So those things are to be customized based on your environment, the team that you work in. So these are the lessons that we faced a problem as a team, we resolved it, moved on to the next one, optimized it, moved on to the next one. So trying to be more and more efficient every time. So this is the Agile Manifesto. Two of these people, Ken and Jeff, were there because they had popularized Scrum as a software development process, if you will. So Scrum, it's a lightweight framework to solve complex problems, trying to optimize business value as the main goal. Theory, it's based on empiricism, so you do something in small steps, get the feedback, and then pivot and improve based on that feedback. That can be for the output or the process itself. That's why it's iterative. Because it's empiric, it's based on transparency, so as much of the process you want to be transparent as possible. You want it to be inspected by the stakeholders at regular intervals, and then based on that feedback, you want to adapt your process and the output, if you will. The mechanics, so you have a product owner talking to the stakeholders, responsible for prioritized product backlog, prioritize for return on effort, if you will. The team at the start of the iteration, which in Scrum is called sprint, would take top X number of those items to work on, and that would form the sprint backlog. They would work in a sprint, which can be 1 to 4 weeks long, actually work on it, and at regular intervals, inspect the outcome of the process. If there are any impediments that need to be resolved, you have the Scrum Master to look after the whole process. You track progress based on looking at dashboards, burn down, burn ups. Then at the end of the sprint, you have the finished product increment. You then inspect it with stakeholders in sprint review, and based on that, you say, okay, do we need to adapt the product backlog? Then you also inspect the process with the team. That's part of sprint retrospective. And then if you change the process if you want to, sometimes you change the product backlog if you have to based on the output. So now into lessons learned. So the context here is, at SLS, we work with hardware, various variants of hardware, and we have various software products. So that's the context where we have a lot of stakeholders, we get requirements from a lot of different places, and the details can vary from very detailed to not much at all. So that's the context to keep in mind when we are going through this. Secondly, as I was saying before, Scrum is a lightweight framework. It's light on details and actually so you saw that the mechanics. What do you do during that 4-week sprint if you have a 4-week iteration? That's up to you entirely. The goal is to get something done and things like that. So this is the optimization that we did based on what the problems we were facing. So the first one is, okay, so the planning is too long, it's too painful, or the PBIs are too detailed. There's no room for developer creativity, if you will. Now, planning is too long, perhaps because we have too many things coming towards us, and we cannot tackle them into our planning session. So what we said, okay, let's have a few sessions during the sprint where we tackle some of those and go through those PBIs, product backlog items, if you will. And if the PBI is too detailed, let's change it. The PBI should be about what you are doing, not how you're doing it. So it's a requirement, not a specification. After that, okay, now that we know what we want to do, how do we know when we are done? That's where you have a definition of done. In our context, because we are dealing with hardware, we said, okay, every PBI has to go through a QA step. And in many cases, that would involve hardware testing. If you are developing something and test it on hardware in different variants, all the relevant ones, if it doesn't work, it's not done. So it's failed testing and it goes back. Now this is not a problem that we face, but an event that happened and how it benefited us. So having the right tools is very important. Before this, we were using a tool which was not conducive to Scrum. Now we are using Azure Devops, which is very conducive to Scrum and Agile. So what this gave us is much more transparency. So for instance, in this dashboard, I can see what state. So state here is how we've defined in our definition of done, there is a QA state. Every PBI has to go through QA, so it will go through a QA state. Because of Azure DevOps, we can have that intrinsic in our workflow. it gives you traceability. In this, we can go from release notes all the way back to a PR or a code snippet and the PBI, figuring out how it exactly got there, who requested it, why, and what we did for it, what Azure test plans were run on it, which passed, which fails, and all those things. Additional benefits was because we could clearly see this dashboard during every stand-up, we can see that we have to optimize that we get things done, get more working software instead of just keeping things going and keeping people busy. That's not the goal here. The goal is to get working software out so that people can use it and give us feedback. And sprint review then became more focused on working software. That's what we were showing to stakeholders instead of dry PPTs. The one after that is, okay, now we are starting to claim points, but then there is a rush towards the end where we are trying to claim more points. Q8 resource is essentially it's a bottleneck then at that point. They have nothing to do at the start of the sprint, but at the end of the sprint, everyone wants to get their PBIs QA'd and done. So in order to change that, essentially we said encouraging people to claim points at regular intervals. So that will mean helping each other. If I'm doing a PBI, I have a logical pause. Let's pause. Are there any PRs that I can help with QA so I can progress your PBI as well? Are there any QAs that I can help with? Do that and then go back to your PBI. So collectively, this is our commitment, not an individual wanting to be kept busy all the time. This is essentially delivering something that's of value to people. After that, PBIs are not well understood. So when we started then doing more and more work, we are getting more and more PBIs and looking at more and more of those. And also, remember in the past, one of the first lessons was take details out of PBI, talk about requirements and not how we're doing. So the PBIs are now light on detail, if you will. But they are light on the wrong kind of detail. So what we want is, when we get those requirements, there are assumptions about the requirements that are built in because the stakeholder gave it to us 2 weeks ago. The situation may have changed between now and then. And there are assumptions about the proposed solution because we haven't looked at that area of the code in a while. So we may assume something can be done in X amount of time, but it cannot because things have changed since then. Having more few sessions, we went from one few session sprint for an hour to 3 few sessions in a 2-week sprint. So the interesting bit is discovery PBIs. Discovery work is done. Discovery essentially would be figuring out what to do and what the solution could be. That work is done in the background by product owner or some other people. But you want that work to be explicit, so it again can be transparent, can be inspected, and can be adapted if we want to. So discovery would be figuring out what to build, and then delivery or normal PBIs would be building that thing right. Then most of the PBIs are too technical, QAs cannot understand or test it. So we try to go for vertically slicing it, trying to look at invest as an acronym, okay? In PBIs which are independent in the sprint, they are testable, they are estimable, negotiable, small, and all those things. Perhaps we can use the definition of ready. Nothing gets into the sprint unless it meets that. Because now we are getting efficient, we are doing more in a PBI. We want smaller PRs. So that would mean multiple PRs against a PBI. But that may mean if it's not finished, you do not want underbaked, half-baked, or untested functionality in the product. So we are looking at PBI branches, which is very similar to feature branches. But the additional benefit that we didn't envision at the time is now the QA or product owner can look at the functionality implemented in the PBI branch, test it, and if they are not happy, it doesn't go into the master at all. So it has that no-go gateway, which is an additional benefit. And last but not least, it is possible to do Scrum but still not be Agile. So, thank you. That's about it.